I want to spend this morning mostly talking about minimalism. I may fly through a few things quickly, but if it feels too quick, slow me down. Obviously, always feel free to stop me and ask questions. But minimalism. Just to reboot where we were, because it's been a couple weeks, Clement Greenberg is who we were talking about, and we were using this essay as one way into understanding what minimalism is, minimalist art. In this essay, we saw him saying things like this: the essence of modernism, and we've already seen him give a timeline, a kind of a telling of what modernism is, or avant-garde painting is. And the essence of it, he says by 1960, lies, as I see it, in the use of the characteristic methods of a discipline to criticize the discipline itself. Not in order to subvert it, but to entrench it more firmly in its area of competence. So, he uses examples from philosophy, logic, used to ground logic and to criticize logic. Aesthetic judgments used to sort of shed all of the external reliances that it has and somehow make more competent aesthetic judgments and so on. And within each of the art forms, he's going to say, well, what this means for modernist painting is painting criticizing painting, sculpture criticizing sculpture, trying to shed all of the things it's been falsely relying on and to make it more competent in itself. Okay, so that's what we saw. We saw him say this as well. The task of this self-criticism within modernity became one of elimination, and that's, I think, important for understanding what we're going to talk about today. The task of self-criticism became to eliminate from the effects of each art any and every effect that might conceivably be borrowed from or by the medium of another art, of any other art. Thereby, each art would be rendered pure, and in its purity find the guarantee of its standards of quality as well as its independence. That may be a little bit wordy, but what's he saying? The task of self-criticism is ultimately one of eliminating reliance and subservience to the other art forms. In short, what can painting offer the world that nothing else can offer? If it's been subservient to literature, for instance, then it's not offering what it has to offer, it's offering what literature has to offer. What is painting? What can painting offer? How can it mean in uniquely human ways, or in unique ways that are useful to human communities, human persons, and so on? Did you want to?
Yeah. So how do you destroy all of everything that influences the painting? Wouldn't you have it nothing? Because doesn't everything
yes, I think you're onto something. Where does this stop? How far can you really eliminate anything foreign to the effects of painting itself? How can you even identify what painting is in itself? That's a great question that we'll just suspend, because that is the question that I think ultimately the whole project falls apart on. That's the rock it gets centered on. Yeah, good. Good. And we'll sort that out a little bit. We saw that one of the artists that took this most to heart early on, or at least was saying very similar things, is a guy named Reinhardt, and we read his artist statement last time through. And you had one of his readings from, or an optional reading from one of the previous classes, where he says things like this: the one subject of 100 years of modern art, is that awareness of art of itself, of art preoccupied with its own process and means, with its own identity and distinction, art concerned with its own unique statement, art conscious of its own evolution and history and destiny towards its own freedom, its own dignity, its own essence, its own reason, its own morality, and its own conscience. That's quite a program he's got going on. And what he's going to argue is that the only way that happens is through the stripping of painting from everything foreign to it. So he wants it to be as sort of non-referential as possible. Okay, and where we ended, and this is where we'll start then, is with Frank Stella. Frank Stella becomes, I think, one of the most interesting, most significant of the minimalist painters. And here's a Frank Stella. What do you notice about it? What is it? What's happening here? Did we see a Frank Stella at Mocha? I don't think so. I don't think we had one. We'll see one at Blackmont when we go there. What is it? What is this painting? What do you see? Pattern. Good. So pattern. And how is that pattern built, do you think? Symmetrically. Good. So it's a symmetrical pattern. I think that's important. How else is it built?
It's very geometric.
Very geometric. Good. Straight stripes, or what appear to be straight lines. We'll find that they're actually straight stripes that have an even width, and that causes this sort of repeated geometric pattern to emerge. How is the pattern constructed? Like, if you had to start making this pattern, where would you start? Perhaps the center. And how would you identify where the center is?
Like break it up into like different quadrants. Like it's like 4 squares that you just intersect all together.
Good. Okay. So you could break the thing into quadrants. You could also go from corner to corner and arrive at the same center. And it seems that both of those kind of strategies are happening here. So that we go from corner to corner, or we break the thing into quadrants. In other words, you start with a flat surface, the flat arena of the canvas, or area of the canvas, and you start dividing it. And if you're going to make a painting that doesn't reference anything else, you're not making it to look like a bowl of fruit, or like people in a meadow, or something like that. If you don't want it to reference anything else, then all of the rules for making the painting have to be internal. They have to be derived from the thing itself, right? So how do you divide the space of the painting, the space of the canvas? Well, the canvas will tell you how to divide it. For instance, you go from corner to corner, and then you just keep working out from there. Or you divide the thing in half, and divide the thing in half again, and you construct the pattern of the painting. You design the thing in a way that is internally consistent, or internally referential. What does the painting refer to? It refers only to itself. Only to the shape that it starts with. Now, then, how do you decide on, say, the distance between these lines? What sort of formula could we come up with that wouldn't refer elsewhere, but would refer to the thing itself? That's kind of a hard question unless you see it in person.
It's depth, maybe?
A canvas is traditionally built on a stretcher bars, and the stretcher bars are anywhere from 2 to 3 inches usually. And if you see Frank Stella's paintings in person, the width of these stripes is awfully similar to the depth of the stretcher bar, and that's intentional. How do you, if you are going to design a pattern that's internally referential or totally self-contained, self-referential, find the lines. We've already worked that out. But then the width of the stripes and the pattern that goes on inside of it also has to be internally consistent or referential. So he uses the depth of the stretcher bars. And that's a smart thing to do, because what does that do? It draws your attention to the thing as an object, right? The distance it sticks off the wall. Usually that's a dead zone. That's not where you're supposed to look. You're supposed to look into the painting, not at the painting, not at the thing hanging on the wall. Yeah?
At that point, would it be more of a sculpture than it would be a painting?
Good. The question was, at this point, doesn't this make it more of a sculpture than a painting? I think you're right. I think you're right. And eventually that's going to be one of the directions we'll see coming out of minimalism is, what we're making here is all, well, if not sculpture, because sculpture is kind of a word laden with its own meaning. We're making objects. We're making presences, things that are present. We're making three-dimensional objects. And Frank Stella, we'll see, is pushing painting towards that end, and we'll see a couple other artists that are pushing sculpture toward that end. Yeah, great question. You guys are on the balls. You must have just gotten warmed up with all that writing. So this is Frank Stella. He's someone that you should know. And I'm going to show you several minimalist artists, but I'm going to reduce it, as I always will in these classes, give you a few examples, a few specific people to remember, and then you can branch out from there and get to know the others on your own. So Frank Stella, you should locate sometime 60s is when he's especially important, though obviously he's still alive and he's still making paintings today. And one of the things that you notice from this photograph is how are these things painted? What they look like here is black paintings with white lines on them. In actuality, they are white canvases with black stripes painted on them. So all of the lines that you see in these paintings are the bare canvas. So what does he put on? Black, which I think he does for similar reasons that Reinhardt uses black. It doesn't refer quite as direct. It doesn't refer to, I don't know. It's supposed to be a kind of colorless color, if you will. So he's painting black on white canvas and not mixing any paint because that's too traditional, not including multiple paint colors because that's too sort of messy and not logically clean enough. It is canvas and a colorless color in conversation with each other. In this attempt to be totally self-referential, self-contained objects, paintings. Okay, and we'll look at a few more of these. And we'll see if we can dig into them a little bit further. Carl Andre, who worked as a studio assistant to Frank Stella while he's making his painting, says this: art excludes the unnecessary. And we get this language a lot during this period, right? Exclusion of everything that's not necessary, that's superficial, that's illusionistic, that's not real. Art excludes the unnecessary. Frank Stella has found it necessary to paint stripes. There's nothing else in his painting. He's not interested in expression or sensitivity. He is interested in the necessities of painting. The problems of painting are what the paintings are addressed to. Frank Stella's painting is not symbolic. His stripes are the paths of brush on canvas. These paths lead only into painting. And painting after painting, he is working out patterns or designs that start from the object itself, the stretched canvas, and are thus totally referential to the object itself, trying not to refer outside of itself. And it's fairly remarkable how many different ways you can internally divide a painting, a painted canvas. Dividing it in half, and deriving stripes from that. Yes, it's a real problem, isn't it?
Because it's supposed to be only self-referential. Here you've got Thomas and court plates and the marriage debris.
Yes, good. You've grabbed onto something that is really important for us to grab onto. I'm talking about these things totally in terms of self-referentiality, internal consistency. It's just an object that doesn't refer to anything else. But then you put a title on it like The Marriage of Reason and Squalor. And you want me to talk only about self-referentiality and internal consistency and those sort of things? Yeah.
I'm just curious because it's a picture and it's hard to tell. Are his lines supposed to be, are they varied or like is his intention for them to be all uniform? It's kind of, I can't tell.
Yeah, good. They look up close like this. This is what you're asking, right? How hard edge are they? How sharp are they? The black paintings are not very sharp, which also is a I mean, the lines are straight, but they're not sharp. You get this sort of paint dragged over the lines here and there. The lines waver, even if they go straight from one point to the next, they sort of wobble along the way. That seems to refer us to the act of painting. Maybe that's consistent. The act of painting, the hand on the canvas, those sort of things. But it's certainly not a machined, perfectly geometric process, at least at this point. It gets sharper later. Yeah, good question. He continues to divide the painting in totally self-referential ways. In this way, dividing it in half again, and I suspect with this one, I mean, when I look at this, I see the stretcher bars underneath, actually, that seems to be divided in the same way that the structure that's supporting the canvas would be divided, with center support beams and with cross, what are called gussets that go across the corners. So painting, once again, that refers to itself. And when he talks about them, he talks very much in these terms. My painting is based on the fact that only what can be seen there is there. It really is an object. You can see the whole idea without any confusion or without any other supporting knowledge or background narratives or mythology or any of that stuff. What you see is what you see, period. It is, as he says, a flat surface with paint on it, nothing more. But just as we did last week with Reinhardt, you've already started asking questions about this. Is it really? Is it really so simple as that? Is it really nothing more than a flat surface with paint on it? I mean, after all, he's got these wild titles on them, loaded titles. And this is perhaps one of the most loaded titles of all in his work. It's German. And do any of you know what that is? What that phrase is, or what it means? It's in German it means the raised banner, which is the first line of the anthem of the Nazi Party. And you could also sort of speculate that the dimensions of this thing are awfully similar to a banner flag, perhaps of the Nazi Party, or a political party in one way or another. Now, Stella is obviously intentional about the titles that he attaches to these things. What is he doing with the titles? I mean, on one hand, he's doing the Greenbergian program with the paintings themselves. Totally self-contained, self-referential, internally consistent paintings. But the language, well, and the way he talks about them would also support that. But the titles, this kind of marker that goes on the wall next to the paintings, seems to totally undercut that whole idea. And that seems to be intentional on his part, right? I mean, he's not a fool. He's not a fool to sort of say that, be talking about them in one way and just like, well, that seemed like a good title. Is he here putting the title and the painting, the program of the painting and the program of the titles in conflict with each other? because he already knows that the way you should the way you should title an abstract painting is untitled number 61. That's how everyone up to this point who was really serious about this language was titling them. So what is he doing with the title? We'll go a little bit further and see where he's going and see where this project is going. So the paintings are large when you get to see them in person. They're quite impressive. And one of the things that we notice about 1960 or so is that he eventually arrives at the point of thinking, oh, these are not so internally consistent or self-referential after all, because they're still adopting the square format or the rectangle format. And what do rectangles refer to? Well, as we've just seen, they refer to flags and political banners. They refer to photography. They refer to the history of painting. They refer to windows. Windows that you look through at something. And that is sort of what painting has traditionally been about. Creating visual windows to look into something, to look into a world. So very quickly, or about 1960 or so, he starts violating the rectangle. And we see that with this work, where he sort of gives you the rectangle and then alters it in the middle, if you will. So builds a kind of sculptural set of stretcher bars, stretches canvas over them, and still develops this internally consistent self-referential striping. So the striping refers to the shape of the canvas and to the depth of the support. And we've also recognized that he's moved on from from black. Perhaps black isn't as colorless as thought, or as one presumed. Maybe gray is more colorless and more non-referential. Perhaps. What's that?
Is it gray?
It's gray. It's actually, it's got a little, some metallic powder in it, so it's somewhat reflective as well. Yeah. And these continue, and these are really big. Yeah, right? What's with these titles? In the 60s, at least the early 60s, he moves on to Spanish. All of the titles, most of the titles are in Spanish, which we get here. What does adelante mean?
Forward.
What's that?
Forward.
Forward, yeah. Oh, is that a reference to the avant-garde? The forward guard? What about nunca para nada? Never for nothing, which is an awfully ironic title, I suppose, in the context of the Minimalist project. Is it ironic, or is it to the point? Is it sincere? He's doing something really weird with the titles. On the one hand, he's pushing this Greenbergian minimalist painting on the one hand, and attaching these titles on the other. By the way, I keep mentioning Greenberg. Greenberg actually started getting kind of nervous about all of this. He was like, you're kind of taking this too extreme in a way. You're making them not optical enough. All the emphasis is on logical consistency, and you're not making them optical enough. That's much of what Greenberg says. They're not enough of a visual experience. I don't know. They're pretty remarkable visual experiences, especially in person. These things are big, really big. More or less. The titles do seem funny, don't they?
Almost like inside joke.
Yeah. And I think that might be the case. And I can't, for those of you who speak Spanish, this is awkward to me in my translation. Does it make sense in Spanish? Because it's like the nothing life
Nothing dead.
to the nothing death.
It's more like from the nothing life to the nothing death.
From the nothing, yeah.
Yeah.
They're sort of haunting titles. And why Spanish? I mean, he's not, he doesn't, I don't know that he spoke Spanish. At least was not a native speaker. So why the Spanish? Why another language appearing next to these? Is that a way of sort of jostling or drawing more attention to the kind of artificial attachment of the language to the painting, the title? That it's sort of disruptive, the title, in a lot of ways. And he moves on, and they break up the rectangle in incredibly surprising ways, interesting ways. They start to get a bit more colorful. He starts experimenting with more colors, and he eventually goes into what's called the V series, for obvious reasons. He does a whole series of paintings and works that are all derived from the shape of a V, composed in a variety of ways, put together in a variety of ways. So he's introducing color, and he's introducing subtly these sculptural shapes that are more referential than the previous stuff. I mean, the V is alternatingly an arrow, a piece of written language. I mean, it's more referential in a lot of ways. And then in the late 60s, he goes into what is called the protractor series. Sometimes these are named protractor variation, or in one way or another, something about protractors, where he's taking a protractor, and the shape of the structure of a protractor, and deriving, using that to create the shape, and then deriving all of the patterning from the form of a protractor. Once again, in a lot of ways, becoming more referential, becoming more playful with the color, becoming more kind of exciting, if you will.
Yeah.
So some of them, a lot of these are just named protractor or something or other, but a lot of them he moves from Spanish titles to titles that are the names of cities in the Middle East. So Hatra is in a region in Iraq. So now he's referring to places with these titles, but creating increasingly complex, I suppose, self-referential, self-contained patterns, designs. And these things are massive, by the way. I'll show you a picture to give you a sense of scale. There's a little guy over on the left. So there are these massive sort of mural-sized statements that are they? How do we read them? How are you making sense of these at this point? Are they just confused, or can you do something? Maybe I loaded that question too much. They're not confused. What are they doing? I mean, it could be argued, I suppose, that what Stella is doing is taking this high modernist project that Greenberg identifies and sort of running it to its end in a lot of ways. Maybe, especially with the black paintings, he runs the thing all the way to the end. Can I make a painting that's totally internally referential and internally consistent? Can I do that? And it sort of seems like the answer might be no, that he answers no. That yes, there's something about shedding everything that's the shedding illusion. He's still going to stick with that, and all of these minimalist artists and critics are going to stick with that, shedding illusion. They don't want painting to function as a pictorial window, because that's not real. It's an illusion. So they want the canvas to present itself and the painting to present itself as an object and for it to take its cues and its marching orders from itself to be a fully present object in a way. For painting to do what it can do and what only it can do. So he wants it to do that, but this idea of it being totally self-contained in the way that Reinhardt talks about it seems to be elusive and impossible. Anjali, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the year that was made.
This is early 70s, off the top of my head. Oh no, it's late 60s, 68
Okay.
is that one.
I was going to guess maybe it was the 60s because it looked like psychedelic
Ah, right.
colors, and even like the circle reminds me of the big sun.
Ah, yeah. So even the patterning that supposedly comes from the canvas, the structure itself, is not can't really be extracted from the surrounding culture. Yeah, yeah.
Is he mixing this color, or is he sticking with his original idea of using just pure color?
That's a great question, and one I'm not real sure about. I think these are pre-mixed in like industrial paints. I don't think he's mixing. I think he's using them straight out of the can or straight out of the tube. Yeah, good. I think they're enamel paints too, rather than oil. I think that's right. I should know that. It's lost. So. Yeah, good. Any other hands I saw? Okay. So we'll put Stella on hold a little bit as I think raising some important questions for us. What is minimalism about? What is it doing? What is it trying to do? Is it really going after this internal consistency that only belongs in a museum so that it doesn't refer to anything else? It just provides strong visual experience in the way that abstract music might. Is it purely formal, or is it doing something else? And we'll put that on hold just a little bit. I want to give you, introduce you to a couple other minimalist painters, just so you can kind of get the lay of the land a little bit. Robert Mangold is similar to Stella in the sense that he starts with simple formats like a rectangle and derives whatever form he can from those simple formats. So take a rectangle, take another rectangle that's the same size, switch its orientation, and whatever design goes in the canvas has to be based on what the canvas will give you to define. It's drawing attention, as with Stella, to the object itself, the support itself. And Mangolds are often pretty smart in the way that they do this. He's still doing the same thing. I think they're getting more and more complex lately, where he's using S curves and things like that, but they're all based on, it's almost like a sort of mathematical game, if you will. You start with some parts, and then you play with what you can do with those simple parts while still keeping them self-contained, if you will. So take rectangles, take the length of those, put the same two rectangles that are the same size on either side, and then the line that connects those two is derived from the first line that's drawn from end to end. So once again, every mark that's made refers back to the thing itself. Another painter from this movement time period, Ellsworth Kelly. And what is Kelly giving you here? What's that? The pure primary colors, right? Red, yellow, blue. And letting them, these sort of foundational, fundamental, primary colors for mixing all of the rest of the colors and all of the rest of the color wheel. He lets them present themselves on their own as this sort of triptych of the primary building blocks of color, of an artist's palette anyway, and just lets them work. Yeah.
On some of his other works, he has like really sharp edges
Yeah.
on different kind of forms
Yeah.
and square figures and stuff.
Yeah.
I like those.
Yeah. Where he starts dividing the canvas up inside the canvas. Yeah, that's right. For a while, especially, and he's doing that at the same time and before this time, but especially in the late 60s, he presents these monochromatic canvases, one color per canvas, that again refer to light, to color mixing, to pure sort of visual experience, the spectrum, or the primary colors. And they are pretty remarkable visual experiences. Eventually, as with Fred Stella, he's going to move to the non-rectangular shaped canvas. Or if he's still using rectangles, he starts joining them in ways that breaks the window function of the rectangular canvas. And as Megan pointed out earlier, doesn't this make painting into a kind of sculptural object? And the answer is yes. Common to all of these painters is the object presenting itself as an object. That's the main thing that runs through all minimalism that has to be shed. The one thing that all of them agree on that has to be shed is, even if they disagree about how possible it is to create internally self-referential, totally self-contained images, they all agree that the object has to present itself as an object and not as an illusion of anything else, not as a representation. So if it refers, fine, you can't avoid that, but at least it's not going to present itself as something other than itself. So if it refers in the way that those shapes do, and it refers in the ways that an object hanging on a wall refers. It doesn't refer in the way that people in a landscape refer. But that push towards the objectness of the paintings is going to cause some artists to say, well, why are you still making paintings then? I mean, I guess I can understand you needing to take the tradition of painting, shed off its illusionism, and present the thing as an object. But once you do that, then you're in the realm of sculpture. Why not really go with that and really run with that? The artist that you can most connect to that train of thought would be Donald Judd. Donald Judd he's a sharp guy. He studied philosophy at Columbia and then moved into art making. And Judd so he's very articulate. He did quite a bit of writing, quite a bit of speaking. So if you're interested in him, there's much to read on him. But Judd believed that both painting and sculpture were inherently illusionistic, and so should be superseded by the construction of what he called present objects, specific objects in real space. And you may see some of these this semester. And how would you describe this? What do you see here?
I noticed the space between the water boxes, I guess you want to call shelves or whatever they are. So that's
Good. What about the space in between?
It's the exact same size as the boxes themselves.
So similar to Stella, he's making an object, and if he's going to have multiple objects, or like Stella, multiple stripes, what's the rule that you follow? What's the formula? Well, the spacing between them has to refer back to the objects themselves. So positive, negative, alternating, but keeping the same space. Yeah, good. What else do you notice here? What is it made out of, do you think? Metal, aluminum. Did someone else say something?
Plexiglass, maybe?
Plexiglass. Some sort of, in here are these film, transparent, colored films, usually, that are a plexi. of some sort. All materials that most likely he's not making himself, right? There's no artist hand here at all. With Stella, the artist hand gradually recedes from the paintings. It's more present early on. It gradually recedes, but it's still there. There's still the artist's touch that becomes part of the work. Judd seems to remove that by using all industrialized materials, some of which he has a hand on or takes apart, and some of them not at all. They're just commissioned. The artist initiates the making of the work, funds the making of the work, but someone else does it. Taking an industrialized model and industrialized materials, that's of interest. I mean, I suppose you could say that means that there's no decay in them. They seem like these timeless objects that don't even refer to the passage of time. But on the other hand, you might say, well, they refer to industrialized production. They do refer to aspects of our society that make things out of steel and aluminum and glass, like buildings. Another thing you might notice about these is that they hang on the wall. The wall is the place for painting, right? The wall is the place for windows and paintings to function as windows. I think by Judd putting these sculptural objects on the wall, he's disrupting what the wall is for. He's demanding the objectness of artwork on the wall rather than the illusion, the illusionism of artwork on the wall. And they begin to play with light quite a bit and color. But it's color, things, the objects themselves making color so that you're not even painting them to look like something, painting them by mixing color or something like that. The color is made by light shining on objects. And these things are big. I'm not sure who that is, but she's helping us get a sense of scale for how large these things are. They're generally in these structures 10, perhaps that's of some significance. And they come in a variety of materials. A variety of materials with different finishes so that they have different color casts to them. And then he also begins working on the floor or presenting objects on the floor, these real presences, these real objects on the floor. To be encountered as things that don't refer outside of themselves but are just presences to be experienced, objects to be encountered in front of you. Of interest is if you read Judd, I've been attaching the term minimalism to these artists. If you read any interviews or anything from Judd, he doesn't like the term minimalism, and he doesn't want to be called a minimalist. Sometimes he's called a literalist or something. He's just I don't like minimalism. Why? Because he thinks that minimalism, the term implies that something is missing from the objects, that they've been stripped of something. And what Judd wants to say, sort of over and over again, is no, stop looking for something else to be attached to these things. Let the things themselves present themselves as objects. This is not stripped of anything. This is a present object. In real space. It has positive qualities, not negative qualities, qualities that have been taken from it. And he talks about things like, he talks in terms of experientially verifiable truth. Art that isn't introspective, it's not expressionistic, it's not illusionistic, it is true forms presenting themselves. And true art is not worried about all of that other stuff, but just encountering the visual presence of objects in space. Tony Smith is going to be a similar artist, although he puts these titles on his that are, once again, bringing up the same problems as Stella. Stella. Smith called his artworks presences rather than sculptures, because he thought sculpture is too laden in the past. It has too many associations. So he just referred to them as presences. Are you kind of getting the gist of minimalism? And I guess we can name it, if not minimalism, strict formalism is what it is. And what do we mean by formalism? I think we've used that word a little bit in this class already. What is formalism? We've got a variety of ways that we can interpret the meaning of objects. And formalism is one of the ways one of the theories that has been presented for how to interpret and read a work of art, or read literature, or read music, or whatever. And it is attributing meaning and interpreting meaning from how the form presents itself. So, in sculpture, formalism, or in art, formalism is trying to interpret the meaning of the thing, not by way of referring to other things, but by letting the form impact you, visually impact you, the space of your body, the way that it relates to the space that it's in. That's formalism. Once you start talking about other things like dye, whether that's dice, rolling dice, refers to that, or it refers to dying, then you're out of the realm of formalism. Minimalism, in a nutshell, is a strict sort of formalism, stripping the thing of reference. But then once again, we have this problem of titles, how titles work in this work. This is another Tony Smith, one that we'll see at LACMA. Which he calls smoke. Giving more reference. Problematizing, perhaps, that strict with formalism with the reference of smoke or dice. So what happens with minimalism, the minimalist project? It changes, and it starts changing in the 70s, and it starts feeling as though people are arriving at the sense that it has either been fooling itself, or it has reached a dead end, or there's something missing from it. Especially all of the talk of internal reference, self-reference, internal consistency, purity, all of those things. And we start to get some of that breakdown with someone like Richard Serra. What do you notice about this work? I mean, it's pure forms, rectangles, a cylinder, two rectangles and a cylinder, made out of steel. And what do you notice about it? How would you read the work? Like two big canvases? Yeah, good. What else? If you were standing in front of this, what would it do to you? Yeah.
It's kind of like cutting, or like two giant blades that are cutting into the...
Oh, okay, good. So there's an appearance, perhaps an illusion of cutting. Okay, good. It is precarious.
Like, it feels like it's gonna fall over.
Yes. Good. Good. That's right. Sarah's minimal sculptures have this sort of drama to them, or tension to them. Well, most of the other things that we have been looking at have been very static, very still. They're not supposed to refer, but they're not even supposed to have a sense of time passing to them. They are stable, geometric, mathematical objects for the most part. Whereas Sarah's work feels precarious. They feel like they're going to fall. They feel like they're going to fall over on you and crush your body. They make you much more aware of your bodily presence in relation to them. There's a sense of drama and danger in them. And this applies to the work outside of the museum as well as what's inside. These precarious, minimal forms. And it seems like by introducing that sense of danger or drama or problem to these objects, that yes, they're objects in our space, but we do things with them. We don't just contemplate them from afar and think about them. They're somehow wrapped up in our bodily presence. They're not just mind space and pure optic space. Do you see how that sort of rubs against what we've been looking at and talking about so far? Yeah.
Thinking of the first one especially, it kind of reminds me of like a blown up version of something that you might see in some surrealism that's not really organically or biomorphic. I can't remember all the terms. Maybe like Miro, where there's just like weird shapes in weird spaces.
Okay.
And it's especially that way when, I guess, you know gravity ought to be acting on these things, but it hasn't quite yet, or you're just not sure, and it puts you in kind of that weird surrealist space in reference to the object.
Okay. Okay, yeah, good. So at any rate, what you're saying is that it's not the cool detachment that we've been getting from the earlier things, that it seems to involve us in weird ways. Maybe, as with surrealism, sort of psychological ways. Things seem like they're strange. Rather than with everything else we've been looking at, not so strange, pretty logical, pretty cool, pretty functions like a riddle that has to be solved. These things are more just disconcerting, I suppose. What's that?
They're kind of
Threatening, yeah, that's right. And threatening specifically to our bodies in the context of being in their space with gravity working on both us and them. That is not, these things are working on a bodily level, not just intellectual. That might be a place where the minimalism project starts to crack, is that for all of its emphasis on physical presence, material presence, it sort of ends up being really cool and detached and intellectual and not very bodily at all, right? And Sarah seems to activate that bodily presence, activate these objects as objects in our space. Probably the work that you're more familiar with from Sarah, that we'll see at LA County when we go there, are these massive undulating forms that he creates that just as with the other ones, sort of give you a purely bodily experience rather than optical or visual. As you walk through these things, they put pressure on you. They feel like they close in on you and then open up on you. And because they're such massive, heavy structures, there is the ongoing sense that you are in a precarious position. Yeah?
It reminds me of the
Red Sea when Moses parts it. And
Oh.
like when you watch the cartoon and you're watching them kind of walk through these walls and they can like see all the animals and they're kind of like,
So walls of water, maybe the redness is, it could have helped with that. The Red Sea. That's interesting.
They always make you feel like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. Yeah, because of the way that it squeezes you and opens up in front of you. And in a way, they come through, not in a way, entirely, they come through the Minimalist Project, taking a simple form and doing things with that form. It's just that what it does to you ends up operating on you not just in a optical, riddle, intellectual kind of way, but on a bodily way that does have lots of associations, references. Another artist that comes through this minimalist project, but cracks it and deviates from it and sort of unravels it in a lot of ways, is Carl Andre, who I already quoted at the beginning of class. He was the assistant to Frank Stella. When Frank Stella was working on the black paintings, the black stripe paintings, Carl Andre was a young artist who was working as his assistant, which, by the way, is a wonderful way to get your own artistic career started, work as an assistant. Anyway, Carl Andre makes a cube, the minimalist cube, right? He engages the minimalist cube, but what's going on here? How is this different than Donald Judd or Tony Smith? Yeah.
So the introduction of nature, for one thing.
Yeah.
But secondly, it's also a composite form.
Okay, good.
Multiple pieces to it.
Good. So it's got parts, whereas up to this point we've got a sort of unity, especially with Judd. Things have to be unified, a unity, not made up of component parts. So we've got component parts, we've got the reintroduction of nature. What else? Or natural materials. Yeah.
It's like less refined,
Yeah.
kind of wood,
Good.
just being what it is.
Yeah, good. Not steel, not machined, or maybe machined,
Yeah,
but
slightly,
machined
yeah.
trees.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. But not just purely machined. I mean, it'd be one thing if this was made out of beams, wooden beams that were straight from the mill. This is not straight from the mill. These seem to have been weathered. They seem to have been used. They seem to be dried out. They seem to have already suffered aging. And we haven't seen that at all up to this point. Time operates really strangely in minimalism. Or in other words, there's not supposed to be any time, passing time. They're supposed to be timeless forms, which I think is one of the reasons we get so much geometry. Pure cubes, pure circles, pure geometry, because geometry is timeless. Were there a few other hands up over here? I saw one in the back. Okay. We might also make sense of this as being, I said it's already aged, but it also almost seems to be found objects, found materials, organic materials, and maybe even materials that we associate with specific jobs, like railroad ties or construction materials, beams or building homes or buildings or railways or what have you. Full of associations, a minimalist structure that opens out into all sorts of references immediately and inevitably. And Carl Andre's work is consistently that way. I mean, in one way, this is a minimalist format, if you've ever seen one, a grid setup of simple geometric objects. Oh, what is it? mean, how do you read that thing? It's a graveyard. It certainly reads as a graveyard, right? And when he titles it Lament for the Children, that seems to make that reference even more strongly. And given the time period and its proximity to Vietnam War, the associations start to multiply. And multiply very strongly towards graveyard, towards death, towards lamentation. It's minimalist forms that are finding a way to speak poetically or lyrically, right? That's not the program of the minimalists we've been seeing thus far. And what's interesting is these artists that go through the minimalist project are convinced about the problems of the illusionism of the European tradition, as they'll call it. Those who are convinced of that ultimately start criticizing the way minimalism has been going, and that it's becoming too inhuman in a way. There's not enough humanity in it. There's not enough concern in it. And especially when you do have major wars going on around the world, it seems a little odd to detach into pure optical experience, especially when that pure optical experience is all the while supported by the surrounding culture. That all of those materials of steel and aluminum and canvas and wood are all coming from the surrounding culture, and anything that you make is being installed in museums and galleries that have been built by certain people, supported in economic ways. It all, and the people who come in and have these detached aesthetic experiences are doing so because they've gone to university and they've been taught how to have a detached aesthetic experience. I mean, the whole thing is so heavily cultural already. Why or how can you choose to limit or eliminate back to art in its pure form? How can you get there? What is pure form in that sort of situation? What is pure form? And so these sort of maybe what we can call post-minimalist artists, like Carl Andre, start loading up minimalist forms with lyrical, poetic content. Yeah?
I have a thought or question
Sure.
in correlation with what you were saying. Because as I was writing my paper, I was thinking about how much Pollock was influenced by Greenberg. And so I started thinking about, like, what is art? Because to me, it was artists or something, or people who created things that made people think about their life.
Yeah.
And they did it in a way that was not restricted or restrained by any rules or other thoughts. And so I almost came to the conclusion that art is whatever God puts on your heart. It's from somewhere else because we're emulating a creator. Otherwise, where would our urge to create things come from? And so I was kind of I don't want to say, I guess disillusioned with when artists started following the critics, because I was isn't the purpose of it to be something different or that strikes you in a way that isn't bound by rules? Because that reminds me of religion versus having a relationship with Jesus. And so I just started thinking about all that stuff, so.
Yeah. That, ooh. Yeah, that's a bundle of questions, actually, or thoughts.
Because it even made me think of the Holocaust, because Hitler banned art and burned it, and used to I think there was one guy who joined the Nazi party and secretly still painted, and it just reminded me of the power of art, because he locked all those people up so that no one would think outside of what he wanted them to think.
Yeah. I mean, Hitler's an interesting case with regards to art because he loved art.
Yeah, and then got mad.
got mad specifically at what he thought was the degradation of it by modernism. So, I mean, well, we won't go into it. It was like anytime Hitler comes up, you should just put that in the parking lot, probably. But if you're interested in that conversation, there's a fascinating documentary called The Rape of Europa, or The Rape of Europe, which is about Hitler's art collecting program, which was amazing.
What was it called?
The Rape of Europa, or Europe with an A instead of an E. It's a great documentary. Okay, thank you for all of that. Yeah, I mean, we will see here that what art is doing in the last 60 years or so, maybe in the last 100, is taking a pretty philosophical turn, right? So the critics play an important role, but the artists are making work as philosophy. And that's central to minimalism. It is philosophical art. It is art concerned with logical problems. The logical problem of what do we do with flat surfaces and objects in museum spaces. How do those things hold meaning? How do they carry meaning? And how should they carry meaning? And that philosophical turn is still going. This course, in fact, will get more philosophical as it goes on, especially in the 70s. It'll start to open up into this lyricism, but that is certainly something that we see. More of Andre's work, he's just doing all sorts of things to kind of subvert, go through the minimalist program, but subvert it in a lot of ways. Creating flat sculptures that don't really present themselves in our space, up in our space, certainly not on the walls, but flat things, and things that are full of references, once again, to checkerboards or what have you, to platforms, to steel floors, perhaps, or metal floors, copper floors, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. So he doesn't go that far in referencing making a chessboard. Yeah. Now, it may have occurred to you that all of this talk about minimalism has only included male artists. And I think there's something to that. It does seem that that minimalism in one way or another was fairly dominated, especially the work that seems to appear as a sort of cold, hard, logical calculus. It seems to be men that are operating that cold, hard calculus. There are women working in the minimalist project, however, and they are fascinating, and I think all of them have to be characterized as kind of post-minimalist, because they take that minimalist program once again, and they treat it really differently, and they treat it a lot more lyrically. Eva Hesse is one of the most interesting of them, I think. So I'll give you a counterpoint. I gave you one primary painter to look at, Frank Stella, one primary sculptor to look at, Donald Judd. I'll give you a female post-minimalist sculptor and post-minimalist painter. The sculptor is Eva Hesse. She's German-born, but you should associate her with American art making, primarily in the late 60s, although she had a practice. She was a painter, and so on. And if we go back to this work, for instance, you've got the minimalist cube again. Pure, timeless, self-contained cube that's important to minimalism. But what is this? It's certainly not internally self-contained, self-referential, right? I mean, what at first looks like a cube filled with nails. That's what it looks like, doesn't it? Which is, it feels extremely uncomfortable in there. ends up being these sort of rubber, it's like a rubber tubing that has been folded and stuck through holes. And these are kind of grates on all the sides. So you get these gray rubber tubing things that are sticking out. So what it first appears to be nails and very threatening, ends up being kind of, ticklish, I don't know, like anemones, fingers, they seem to be sort of animated in one way or another. And Hesse is fascinating for the way that she talks about work. In talking about Carl Andre, who we just looked at, she says this: I feel very close to Carl Andre. I felt, let's say, emotionally connected to his work. It does something to my insides. His metal plates were the concentration camp for me. That's minimalism with loaded emotional experience, emotional content, lyrical or poetic content. Seeing this as analogous to concentration camps. They are concentration camps to her. And the work that she does is strongly associated, it can be associated with minimal forms, minimalism. I mean, after all, you look at this and you kind of think Ellsworth Kelly, right? The red, yellow, blue. But what's different? What's different between this and Ellsworth Kelly?
Sure.
Yeah, the texture. They're latex. Skins is how they read. They're like, their skins, their bodies. They refer to the body. And we see that over and over again in Hesse's work. These bodily associations, skin and organs and touch. Robert Hughes is a very well-known art critic, still writing today, who said this: the artist who did the most to humanize minimalism without sentimentalizing it is Eva Hesse. I love that quote. I think it gets to, it cuts to exactly, I think, what she's doing. Humanizing minimalism without sentimentalizing it. Yeah.
Wait, who said that quote?
Robert Hughes. Robert Hughes. With a E-S at the end. H-U-G-H-E-S. And on again, she sort of takes the minimalist cube or the formalist grid and understands that grid as, in terms of bodies, as cavities, as being formed with skin, so on, or skin-like material. Expanded expansion is a great title. That is made out of latex. She used latex a lot. She was very experimental with materials, while you have other minimalists who are experimenting with industrial materials. That's fairly unique to art making at this time: steel, glass, and so on. She's experimenting with latex and fiberglass and things like that. Rope, wood. So she's got this expanse of latex fabric. I think it's cheesecloth that's been rubberized in latex and then expanded into a curtain. In 3 curtains, actually, a set of 3, a set of 5, and a set of 8, which seems to be significant since those are Fibonacci. It's a Fibonacci sequence, if any of you know anything about that. It's a mathematical sequence that may be important here. So she's even taking up the mathematic orientation of minimalism, but presenting it in sort of in a fragile, bodily, there's physicality about it, rather than a kind of detached rationalism about it. So the mathematical forms, the sequences, with fragility. And these are incredibly fragile. When they first were made, because it's rubberized cheesecloth, it was this wonderful sort of fresh skin substance that was drawn across these poles. And over time, it's become really brittle. The thing has aged, and it is extremely fragile now, cracking. It can hardly be exhibited or moved because it's become so fragile. And that riffs on the sense of time in minimalism in a wonderful way. Her works age like bodies age. Whether she intended that or not, they do. And this is Hesse doing cylinders. You know, they seem animated. They seem more connected with life. Cylinders more connected with life forms than they do with geometry, specific, at least abstract geometry. I want to give you one more minimalist artist, and then we'll break for lunch. And that's Agnes Martin. So if Hesse is the sculptor, Martin the painter, who similarly to Hesse is going to take minimalism and the minimalist form and reconfigure it a bit. This is Agnes Martin later in life rather than the dates I've given here. She died just a few years ago, 6 years ago, I guess. And there are wonderful movies of her that you should look up. Maybe I'll post those on Blackboard because they're wonderful. By the way, I didn't mention it with Hesse. I did mention that she was experimenting with materials a lot, and some of those materials were highly toxic, resins, fiberglass, and so on. She died at a very young age. I think she was 34 from brain cancer from these materials that she was. No one really knew what they were doing, how dangerous they were. She was just working with them, and took its toll on her in a terrible way. So protect yourselves. Be experimental with your materials, but protect yourselves. We would love for Hesse to have been making art as long as Agnes Martin made art. Okay, Agnes Martin. We'll breeze through her real quickly, not because she's easy to breeze through. In fact, we should spend some quality time with her, but just for the sake of time. So when you look at an Agnes Martin painting, the first and last most prominent thing about it is the grid. The grid runs through all of her work. It's extremely grid-oriented. The modernist grid, the minimalist grid she takes up. But the way she takes up it is fascinating and really different. You can see from the materials list here that this is gold leaf, and what do you think immediately if it's gold leaf? What does that point you to? Icons, yeah. The holy, the sacred spaces, transcendent spaces, the light of God. And that gold leaf has been incised, I believe with pencil marks, but the rest are pencil, and I believe this one is too. Incised with pencil marks. It is very carefully drawn, hand-drawn grid. She varyingly uses rulers, sometimes without rulers, drawing lines, creating grids. And the way she talks about these are fascinating and perhaps not what you'd expect from the grid that she deals with. She says this, her art, as she said, is about what is known forever in the mind. And the experience that she wants people to have is the simple, direct going into a field of vision as you would cross an empty beach to look at the ocean. And it's the grid that does this for her. She says this: when I cover the square with rectangles, it lightens the weight of the square and destroys its power. And I think she would say, makes possible that experience of crossing an empty beach to look at the ocean. You get lots of, I think, references with her, or lots of language that sounds somewhat like Rothko, in the sense that she's interested in spiritual experience, spiritual space, that which can't be seen, looking into the ocean across an empty beach. And they are ultimately, how she talks about them, and I think it's a legitimate view, they are they're meditational experiences. She draws the grid not for the purpose of, I don't know, thinking about the problems of painting or the problems of drawing. She draws the grid as a way of meditating. And they are hand-drawn, so there are evidences of her hand. Things get dirty, smudged, the lines wobble because they're in graphite, they're in pencil. They have this sort of delicate flicker, fragile flicker to them. And they seem to be a sort of meditational experience, drawing the grid within the square of the canvas. Lawrence Alloway, who is a critic, another critic, referred to these as, this specific painting, as a veil, a shadow, a balloon. They are temporal or fragile temporal orders. They are organic grids, trembling spiritual vibrations. At any rate, what we get from Agnes Martin is not, seems to be something a bit other than the minimalism we've been talking about. It's taking minimalist form once again, and a refusal to illustrate or represent or create illusions, but instead takes up the minimalist forms as a spiritual practice, or as in one way or another pointing you to something else, something transcendent, perhaps she would say. And she delivered a lecture, and we got in, but she delivered a lecture at Yale in the 70s, in which she talks about some of this, gives her a position about painting. And I think I can mostly describe it just with the title. Here's the title of her lecture that she gives at Yale. We are in the midst of reality, responding with joy. That's not what you expect out of an artist, a major artist working at this time. Responding to reality with joy, a joy of the mark making, and a joy of somehow engaging the field in which you are working, the field of the canvas. And we'll end with this one, and with a short quote from her. This is Agnes Martin, written at the same time as she makes this painting, drawing, artwork. She says this: I can see humility, delicate and white. It is satisfying just by itself, and trust, absolute trust, a gift, a precious gift. I would rather think of humility than anything else. Humility is the beautiful daughter. She cannot do either right or wrong. She does not do anything. All of her ways are empty, infinitely light and delicate. She treads an even path, sweet, smiling, uninterrupted, free. Is humility at the center of her work? Is the minimalist language that she is employing about if there is a pulling back to to just what the canvas gives you? Is it more about humility than it is a philosophical problem? What happens?
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.